Hey there, Pastor Rob here. I got a request a little while ago from someone who asked if I would kind of show how to do a Bible study or how to study a text. And so I thought I would do that. We're gonna in the next, I think, week or so, couple weeks, we're gonna be in our morning service. We're gonna be looking at Isaiah chapter 40, verses 27 to 31. So what I'm gonna do in a second, I'm going to put the text up on the screen, and you'll notice that what I've done is I've kind of broken it all down phrase by phrase. And I have not looked at this text in any great detail yet. So, what you're going to have for the next, probably 15 or 20 minutes is me just walking through the text. And I'm going to study the text exactly as I do if I'm preparing it for a message, and I'll make some comments along the way. And in the process, hopefully, you'll get to see a little bit about how sermon work is done. And this is for some of my students that I've had in teaching classes, but also really for anybody who wants to just gain a little bit more insight into how do you study a biblical passage. So here we go. I'll put the screen up, and now you can see the screen in front of you. And we're going to just start looking here. Oh, let me center it first. Let's try that. Here we go. Uh, Okay, perfect. So our text is centered. And one of the first things that we're going to notice is, well, first of all, this is from Isaiah. The reason that's important is because Isaiah, first of all, is prophecy. It's a prophetic work that was addressed to Old Testament people during a pretty dark and difficult time. And so we want to keep that in the back of our mind as we're going through the text. Now, one of the features of prophetic work is that it often uses Hebrew poetry, poetic form, and we actually see that right away from the very beginning. So, why do you say and speak? So you can see that's a repetition there. That's classic Hebrew poetry where it repeats the same thing in two phrases back to back. So but it changes a slight detail here. So Jacob and Israel. It's really a way of saying the same thing twice for emphasis. So we know already that um, God is God is the one speaking here. The prophet is speaking as if he's speaking in God's voice, and God's addressing his people, and he's asking them a question. Why do you say and why do you speak? And then the question is, well, what is it that God's people, what is it that Jacob and Israel are saying and speaking? And that's answered right here. And so here's what the people are saying. And again, there's some parallelism here. So let's just for fun change the color of the font here. So my way is hidden, my right is disregarded. And again, the connection is in both phrases. It's Lord and God. So my way is hidden from the Lord, my right is disregarded by my God. That's parallelism. You can hear how it's the same idea, slightly restated in one phrase from one phrase to the next. So what are the Israelites saying? They're complaining against God. They're really saying that God is not paying attention. It seems that God is not paying attention to their way, which maybe is a way of talking about their day-to-day life. God isn't paying attention to what's happening in my life. And then my right, um, probably what that means, and we'll follow up on that a little bit later, but probably the idea there is that the people are feeling as though and sensing as though God is not dealing justly with them, that God is overlooking what is rightfully theirs. And that could be an experience in a time of, warfare. It could be a time of oppression when they feel as if they're suffering for no good reason. Now, a lot of times what I'll do in a case like this is I'll just make a little note of that word there. And it's just a reminder to go back and do a little bit more study on that particular word. So God now, my pen isn't working for some reason. Um, Fix that. God now responds to his people. So what we'll do, just for clarity, we'll put back that first color. And actually we'll notice that God now is responding. Now is God responding, or is it the prophet speaking on God's behalf? The answer is can easily be both. It doesn't need to be one or the other there. Let's erase that line there. All right. So again, the question comes in response. Have you not known? Have you not heard? A parallel phrase again. And the essence of that response is here. It's found in this section here. The Lord is everlasting, the creator. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. Now that's, in a way, that's like what we call staircase parallelism. So you start off with one idea here, everlasting. And then the second phrase builds on that he's the creator. And so it kind of just escalates, and sometimes it even, that's another form of Hebrew poetry where it just takes one idea and just builds it up one thing after the next. So what the prophet is doing is he's reminding the people, even though it seems as if their way is hidden and their right is disregarded, it's not actually true. Objectively, it's not true. What we're seeing here is that, no, the Lord is the everlasting God. He's the creator of the ends of the earth. And of course, ends of the earth is a way of talking about the totality of the entire universe. It's a way of reminding us that God is sovereign over everything. And not only that, we go a little bit further here. He does not faint. He does not or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. Now here's where you get a little bit of repeated words. So we have here the idea of fainting. Let's just for fun, let's do it this way. I'm going to erase this here. Let's use a different color. Now let's talk about let's just choose whoops, how about let's choose red for the attributes of God that the prophet seems to be highlighting for us. And we see he does not faint, but he gives power to the faint. So there's kind of that repeated word. God doesn't faint, but to the faint he gives power. And then he he gives to him who has no might, he increases strength. So there's a sense in which what God is doing, you begin to see that God is the one who doesn't faint, and God is the one who has strength, and he gives that power and he gives the might to those who don't have it. In other words, God is the source of everything that his people need. Here's that word faint again. And so you begin to kind of see the thinking that emerges. Again, the people are feeling and sensing as if they're out of God's sight, that God has turned his face away from them, that God is not concerned about what's happening, and perhaps the people are being oppressed and the people are bothered by this. And God's response is no, the Lord is the everlasting God is the creator of all things. He doesn't faint. He doesn't grow weary. Oops, didn't mean to move that. Let's move it back so that we can. There we go. He gives the people the strength, and he gives them the power that they need to face this situation here. Oops, I did it again. Look at that. My bad. Now we can see if we can line it up again just right. There we go. Let's make sure we don't do that again. So all these things, all these problems over here that the people have, God is going to be the one to meet those needs. Now, here's where I think the passage takes, maybe moves into some of the more well-known words. There's our word faint again, by the way. Begin to kind of highlight that. You see how often it does repeat. I'm going to, just for clarity, I'm going to take out this instance because we want to be consistent. So, these last words are some of the more well-known words, I think, in this particular passage. We're going to highlight one more word here because I always like to highlight words in a text. For me, that's kind of a big thing. I maybe make too much of it at times, but I think it's always really helpful when you start focusing on certain words that are repeated. That often gives you some real insight into what the text is about. So here's one, strength. And then I found it again down here, strength. Um, there's another one. Yeah, weary is another one that I noticed. I don't know if you caught that too, but over here is the word weary and weary. And then there's you'll notice that here's how it ends. All these repetitions in English, anyways, of the word shall, and maybe that's just a way of outlining the promise that God has for his people. This is what they shall do. They'll renew their strength. They'll mount like eagles. They'll run and they'll walk and not be faint. And so here's this picture, the picture that begins to emerge. And we've only done the first little part of the Bible study here. We've only spent maybe 15 minutes or so on this. But what you begin to see is that the picture begins to emerge. The problem isn't just that, a person is tired in the morning because, they're working really hard or something like that, and they need just a little extra jolt of caffeine. The problem is this crisis in terms of relationship with God. It starts out over here. Why the people, Jacob, Israel, what they're saying, they're crying out to God. They're saying God doesn't care about us. God doesn't pay attention to us. He doesn't care that we're being mistreated. And the prophet is responding with that by way of encouragement. He's saying, no, that's not true. Don't you remember? Haven't you heard that God is everlasting? He's the one who created the world. And he is as the creator and as the maker of all things, he doesn't get tired, he doesn't get weary. His understanding is unsearchable, which, by the way, I didn't maybe say all that much about that, but here's where maybe that helps us see things. Up here, where the people are saying, God is disregarding our situation, and the prophet is instead saying, no, just because your situation is difficult does not mean that God has disregarded you. It just means that you probably don't understand it. And you're trying to understand an infinite God, and that's obviously very difficult to do. So he's sort of correcting that misunderstanding. The prophet begins by correcting that misunderstanding and reminding us that God is sovereign. He's in control of all things. He sees all things. But then he ends with this promise, and he moves into this last section here, which is the promise that God has to restore and to strengthen his people. And when, God is the source of the strength that they need, he's the source of the power, the encouragement, and God is the one who will give that freely to his people. He gives the power to the faint, and he increases the strength of him who has no might. So there's this promise that when we look to God, he will give us the strength that we need. Now, we're going to stop here. We haven't finished really what this text is all about, but we've gotten a pretty good understanding. We've gotten a pretty good picture of what Isaiah chapter 40, 27 through 31 is all about. Where do you go from here? Well, you jot down some of these notes that I've already made, but then you start reflecting on them, and you start asking, what does that look like for us today? What are some of the similar situations in which we might feel and sense that God is not paying attention to us? We begin to ask the questions of how do we seek that strength? And then we always, so you begin to reflect on that. Then one of the other things you do, if you have access to it, you use a good study Bible, use a good commentary, and you see if you can flesh out more of what some of these ideas are. You might do some word studies. If you are able, you might look at some of these, we talked earlier about my right. Well, what does that exactly refer to? What does it mean that your right is disregarded? So you look at some of these other concepts. You try to pay attention to the imagery here when it talks about mounting on wings like eagles. What exactly does that call to mind? Why does the prophet use that imagery and that word picture to, what is he trying to communicate with that? And then you always ask, so how is this made more complete in and through the person and work of Jesus Christ? How does our union with Christ, and that's sort of, again, I'm thinking out loud here, but how does our union with Christ provide the ultimate strength that we really truly need when we face discouragement? How does it answer that question that, when we sense that, maybe put it this way, when we sense that we are disregarded by God, or we sense that God is perhaps not paying attention to us, how does looking at the cross and looking at what Jesus has done for us, how does that actually give us strength to face our adversity? So those are the questions you begin to ask, and you begin to kind of outline it. It's a way of sort of preparing a text and digging into a text and trying to understand its original meaning. So, as I said, this is only a beginning. We've only done about maybe 15 minutes worth of study on this, but it's hopefully gotten you thinking and seeing a little bit how to actually study a text when you do it in person. So thanks for joining along, and don't forget, in a couple of weeks you'll hear a sermon on this text here at Sunny Slope, and you can kind of see what we do with the text from there. Thanks for watching.